the rain will come. The rain will come. Yeah. Eventually. They say in an hour and a half. We don't know. Oui. Yeah. Anybody else in the ladies' room?
Yeah, I'm missing my wife.
That's an important.
It's pretty important.
Yeah. She might be a little upset about being left behind.
He wants a medal too.
You have to work hard for your medal. And you have to be Jewish. Now, I heard it in your country, I don't know why. Come closer, people, don't go so far. I heard that in your country, unlikely like in our country, that men propose to women.
What, you're saying that women propose to men
In our country?
Is that right?
This is how I was kidnapped. No, we're not going to talk about this. This is Louis. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have a friend that lives here and knows a lot about this area.
My wife didn't propose to me. She just said, well, I'm pregnant. Do whatever you want of me.
So,
Oh, there's so many kids around. Which I'm so happy to come and guide you because I need to hear them. Well, they're not far away. Okay, guys, hello, how are you? My name is Leo. I live just down the hill.
Nice.
remember the kibbutz we drove by?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very hard life to wake up in the morning and walk 3 minutes and dip your feet in the water of one of the three origins of the Jordan on a daily basis.
Oh.
It's a hard life, traffic jams and such. Alright, so what are we going to do today? We're going to explore this unique fortress. It's called Nimrod Fortress, which actually has a different name, but we're going to hear later on. Few people that wander around this area, and we're going to discover who built it and why they built it and why we're standing in this unique place on the almost the peak of the Hermon range. In order to understand a little bit better, we'll start with climbing. It's not that much. We're going to climb from here, it's even easier. When we're going to stand the first tower, it will be easier for me to understand. Feel free to ask whatever you want. Remember, through your travels, that in the end of the day, history is a word that combines two words together. His story. Anyone can tell you history in any way he wants to. It's up to you to decide what you take with you to the rest of your journey. Let's start walking.
Anything else you can add?
Careful, Abby. Rule number one, don't look up when you're on continuous rock. She just said it. Sorry, Abby.
Oh. These are some big steps.
Don't touch it, right? Don't even lean on it.
Get a view of that.
Take your time, people. Take your
Quite a
time. If
drop.
you need to pause and catch your breath,
Quite a
you
drop off
absolutely
there.
should do that. So the rock ready? Yeah. I reckon whatever you want to call it. They're always sunbathing before the sun is gone. They like to sunbathe.
Well, they don't make it easy, do they?
You too? Thank you.
I would assume so.
They look like they're the same as the rock walls.
Yeah, check out that view. I take it that not much is going to sneak up on you from here.
מה השעה עכשיו?
12 כזה, 12 זה ברבע, מקסימום.
So, before I start talking about the whole history of the place, we'll understand a little bit where we are. First of all, you came from Tel Dan, which is a few minutes of driving and just on the north side of the Hula Valley. And we're sitting now on the Hermon range. The Hermon is basically the highest mountain or range in Israel. It's not high in your matter, but in our perspective, woo! Gigantic. 6,500 feet, the peak of Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon, all of it is made from limestone, which means that underneath the face of the surface sits the three origins of the Jordan. Most of this range will be hollow. And the water of the three origins of the Jordan, like we saw before, Dan is the biggest one of them, are coming from Mount Hermon. It takes this water about a year to find their way from the mountain and up to the rivers itself, which means that basically we can't suffer from a lack of water. Because what you saw running in the river is not from this winter, it's from last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I actually even was, as a kid, 3 times learned the Testament. I went with someone to one of the peaks of Mount Hermon and we put specific kind of paint which we don't want to talk about. And I came with him a year later and saw it coming in the river.
Wow.
Yeah, it's saw it in Maronite, so yeah, I even believe in what I'm saying. And to understand why is there such an impressive fortress building here, we need to understand about the biggest city we can see around. First of all, the biggest economical center of this area throughout history, where was it? Do you have any idea? It's not that far from here. Damascus. Damascus, it's not that far from here. It's about 50 kilometers, very close to here. And throughout history, Damascus is where all the big markets are and all the goods are having. And if you're one of the people that's working in these markets and you want to send your goods to the other places in the world, you want to get to the closest port that there is. And the closest port that there is next to us is about, let's say, 80 miles that way. Yeah, I need to start speaking in miles and not in kilometers.
It's okay.
Just did it.
It's all right.
It's about 80 miles that way, which is Ekron. So Ekron, Damascus, and this is the reason why this fortress is standing. This fortress was built in the year 1227. It was built by a guy called El Aziz Uthman. he was Ayubin. But the story begins a few years earlier. Around the year 1000, who sits in this area are the Ayubins. The Ayubins were tribes of Muslims living their life here pretty peacefully. Along this time, the Crusaders will start to arrive to this area. Of course, Muslim, Christian, we're in Israel. You give us a good war, we'll love it. We don't have a problem. But the biggest leader of the Ayubin, does anyone know what his name was? Have you heard about him? He was pretty famous. Salah ad-Din. And he was so great that his name was Salah ad-Din the Great. Back at the time, you could call yourself the Great. Today, you can call yourself the Great. Yeah. So Salah ad-Din the Great was the leader of the Ayubin, and he decided to change this area of the Mediterranean and goes to a battle against the Crusaders. This battle took place in the year 1187. Next to the Sea of Galilee, not that far from here, about an hour from here. In this battle, the Ayubins are won, and they're going to be the new ruler from Egypt in one side and up to Syria on the other side.
That's all, Shnelia? People, you remember the horns of Chittim yesterday?
Yes.
This is it. This is what he's talking about. Remember yesterday? We saw it. That's the battle that determined the future of the region. Yeah.
Very important. Since they want to make sure the goods from Damascus, the capital of the area, will go to Accra, they're starting to think about building something that will protect this road. But what happened and what was more interesting happened in the year 1227. At the time, two of Salah ad-Din the Great, two of his sons ruling this area. One son is sitting in Egypt and the other one in Syria. You know where it is, you have two sons, obviously they need to fight between them. And as I said before, we're in the Mediterranean, we'll have a good fight. So the son that sits in Egypt decide to become an ally with Friedrich II, which was the leader of the Crusaders at the time. And they're going to make a very interesting deal between them. To the Ayubins, the port of Accra was very important. The biggest port in the area, they need it, they don't want to fight about it with anyone. And he's willing to give him Jerusalem. And he's making a very interesting deal with him. He said, I'm going to give you Jerusalem, I don't need it anyhow. I have Damascus, which at the time was more important. Try to say it today and be out of the country, but at the time. And what happened then is that the son that sits in Syria understands that the Crusaders won't stop in Jerusalem. They have Jerusalem, okay, that's fine, maybe they're going to be settled for a year or two, but they're going to look to the east and they're going to see Damascus, and they want to go to Damascus. And then he's building this fortress. It's called in Arabic, Qala at-Subayba, the fortress on the cliff. And it sits in the exact place that's ruling the whole area. Because at the time, we're talking about 1227, 1230. It took, by the way, 3 years to build this fortress. At the time, most of the Hula Valley, or at least of the southern part of it, is a swamp, which means that no one can walk through the swamp. The Golan Heights, only today, it's the most beautiful area in Israel. Back in the past, it's an area of thieves and robbers. There isn't even one army that throughout history crossed the Golan. Which means that if you're one of the Crusaders and you sit in Jerusalem and you look on Damascus, which is your next stop, there's only one way you can walk. You can walk on the slopes of the Golan, which means not in the swamp and not on the Golan itself, basically on the area of the Jordan River. And when you reach this creek, which is called Sa'ar, and that's the creek which separates geographically the Golan Heights from Mount Hermon, because the Golan Heights is all volcanic ground and the Hermon mountain is all limestone. And then you have to cross through here, which means that a fortress that will sit here and will be built big enough and impressive enough and scary enough will made a side effect that no one will even have a battle here, because Crusader soldier walking from Jerusalem. When he's passing the Sea of Galilee, he still has about almost 3 weeks to walk until he reaches this point. Every day he wakes up, lifts his head up, and see the fortress. The fortress is impressive, and it's scary. And at the end of the day, they won't even reach it, because they will see them from far away. They will send the guards, and they will send the soldiers to fight with them down in the valley. So an interesting fact is that throughout history, there wasn't even one battle here. Which means, first of all, they built it very, very good. Second of all, the only thing that managed throughout history to ruin a little bit of the fortress is a huge earthquake that happened here in the year 1837. Besides this earthquake, if this earthquake will happen, this fortress was stayed completely as they built. Up until 6 months ago, not that far from here in Syria, there was a Crusaders fortress called Parc de Chevalier, one of the most beautiful Crusaders fortresses in the world, that until 6 months ago, or until 8 months ago actually, it was standing the same way the day they built it, even with painting on the wall and everything. And unfortunately in Syria, everything is flat, and so is the fortress. But if we look, for example, to the other side, it's a little bit hazy, so it's hard to see, but Lebanon, which is very close to us, the Bufo is a fortress which is just in front of us, and then on the range itself, there's another Crusaders Bufo, obviously Crusaders fortress. Hunin, another Crusaders fortress on the Naphtali mountains in front of us, and Montfort and Yechiam. There's quite a few Crusaders fortresses in this area, which supposedly, and I remind you what I said on the word history before, which supposedly we assume that what we see today is Crusaders, but there's a maybe. Because what we know for a fact is who built this fortress, and we'll see it as we start talking soon, and we know who came afterwards, but there's a period of time we're not quite sure who was here. If you go to the history books in school, my son is in school and he's studying on Nimrod Fortress, then it's written that Nimrod Fortress was Crusaders. But the history books in school were written before 1987. In 1987, something very interesting happened. And underneath us is the Banyas. The Banyas is the first of the 3 origins of the Jordan. King Herod built a huge city, and Jesus once upon a time went through there. And they discovered in 1987 a huge Crusaders town that was in the Banyas. And they're not quite sure if the Crusaders stopped in this town or even came to sit here, because maybe they didn't have any reason to sit actually here, because the whole area was under their control. So what we're going to do first is we're going to walk a little bit in the fortress, and I want to show you something very interesting, so you can walk a little bit and come next to the western gate.
Gotta stay close there.
When the fortress was built, and it was built in 1227, that was the western gate. The tower that we're standing on didn't exist at the time. It was built about 30 years later. When it was built 30 years later, it was the tower of one of the sultans that ruled this area. How do we know that a sultan sat literally in this tower? Because there's a toilet behind you. And no one's building a toilet for just anyone. If there's a toilet here, and we're talking about years that to build the toilet was something like a month of work, then probably the sultan sat in this tower. Of course, that next to the toilet, there's a cistern. We have about 19 water holes or cisterns in the tower. Water was never a problem here. As I said before, the 3 origins of the Jordan are just underneath us. And if you're digging the rock for 12, 13, 15, 20 feet, you reach water. So water was the problem anytime. The western gate, when it was built in the beginning, in 1227, has an inscription on the top with few words in Arabic. Does anyone know how to read Arabic? No. Which is excellent, because I can tell whatever I want now. Once upon a time, exactly. So, as any inscription, first of all, in the first 4 lines, the Sultan that built this fortress tells the story that he built this fortress. Al-Aziz Uthman, the Sultan, built this fortress. But what's very interesting to see is the last row, because in the last row we understand that he's writing that he finished the fortress in 1230. Now this fortress is about almost 4.5 miles, the walls around the fortress. When they build the fortress in the beginning, he's building 5 watchtowers and almost 4 miles of wall. And he built it in 3 years. And that was in 1227.
Wow.
The Ayyubians at the time don't have any slaves. No one's getting money for his work. They're building the fortress because the Sultan is telling them that they need to build the fortress. He's not even a Sultan at the time. At the time, he's only the son of Salah ad-Din the Great. But the fact that he asked them to build him a fortress is enough. 3 years.
Wow.
No concrete, no nothing. Rocks that they put one on top of the other, which is pretty amazing.
Yes.
In the next tower that we'll visit, we'll try to understand how they literally build it. But this is one of the gates. How do you build a gate? The first thing that will be in the entrance to the gate is bars that will stop the people from getting in. Then there'll be 2 arches with a gap between them. And in the end, there'll be a wooden door. How do we know that there was a wooden door? Because when you cross it in a second, you can see it on the right and on the left side, you can see square holes in the rock, which means that there was a huge log that locked the gate. Okay? And if by any chance you're one of the enemies of the Ayyubians, and let's say you cross the bars somehow, and you were stuck in the wooden gate, then you lift your head up and you saw 2 arches with a gap between them. And before you manage to ask why is there a gap between them, but boiling oil. Easier. Make falafel with the oil and then Now, this fortress is very, very different from huge fortresses you can see in Europe or in other places in the world, because this is basically was built as an army base. Which means, for example, when you enter the gate, and ignore this wall in front of you because it's not a part of the fortress, you need to turn right. Which means that it's very easy for the soldiers that serve in this fortress to protect it, because the only thing they need to do is stand on the other side. Everything in the fortress is built in a very, very smart way to protect this area. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk a little bit, we'll reach the other tower, and then we'll understand how they actually build this fortress.
I know. And the glue.
That's the good question. It's nice and
No,
cool.
I've seen those. But still amazing.
Yeah, it's totally.
3 years. I think it's taking
These rocks must weigh hundreds and hundreds.
and make them fit perfectly.
I guess. Oops, sorry. Danger of collapse.
Of course, in their time, there were none of these railings here. I'm sure there were soldiers that would come out here having imbibed a little too much, and over they went. Look at that. Wow.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
This is incredible, you guys.
And one of the interesting things to see when we come to a place with a lot of history around it on a nice and rainy day is to try and look on the ground, see something very interesting like these two. There's lots of leftovers of pottery.
Yeah.
Yeah, with color and everything. After the rain, they're coming out. Okay, we're not jumping from here. We can. So, this is the northern watchtower. And we're gonna get inside in a few minutes to understand how they built it. But before we go into that, I wanted to show you the eastern tower. The eastern tower is basically the edge of the fortress. And the eastern tower is the first thing they're building in the fortress. When they're building the fortress, you were very brave with doing that. That's steel. Because I've been here for like 12 or 13 years guiding here, and I never dare to do it. Now I know I can. So the idea behind building the fortress is that they're afraid of the crusaders that are going to come here. So they need to build everything very, very fast. So they're trying to think of an idea, how can we build the fortress fast, but as we're building, we want to already protect this road. It's a very important road. So the eastern tower is actually completely full. Well, it's not hollow inside. There's no room inside like this one we're going to enter in a minute. And it's built from smaller rocks. If you look better than what I can see, because I can't see it now. And so they build it very, very fast with smaller rocks. It's the highest place in the fortress. And then they're going to put guards on this tower. And while the guards are already working, the builders will build the wall around the fortress and all the other watchtowers. But it's already working as an army base. Because they finish the highest tower and they can observe and look to the distance and see how things are going on. By the way, nothing to do with this place, but when they start building Israel, after Israel was founded, and most of the places was built in the same way. It's called a tower and a wall. You build the tower, then you build the wall, and then you build all the rest of the same. So on the same specific idea. The first and very important thing they did in the process of building this fortress was to decide they're not going to bring rocks from other places to here, or they're not going to change the formation of the mountain, which means they're going to build the fortress in the same way the range itself is. You can see that they didn't change it at all. And the rocks, they will take rocks that already exist here, bring it to the stonemason that will give them a nice shapes to build it, but they're not going to make any efforts besides using what they have around them, which will make the process of building a lot easier. Now we're going to step inside this watchtower to see how it's built. The steps are a little bit steep. Slowly. There's a bell on the right side, and we'll get inside. If you want to fall, try to fall on one of your friends. It makes it a lot easier. Michael just looked at me.
my friend. You can follow me.
If anyone doesn't like steep steps, you can walk around it, and there's a much easier steps to go through. It's not a must to go through here.
Okay, for those of you who don't want to use those ones, can use the other one.
We reach the same place.
Pottery as well, but it's not the colored.
No one's sneaking up on this place.
Nope. Oh my gosh, isn't it like breathtaking? It's just crazy.
We
Amazing.
put a couple of our military guys up there with sniper rifles, and they will protect this whole place. Nothing will get within attack range.
Figured I'd ask you first and then I'll ask you.
You ready to buy it and move in? You get your nice Mountain View.
Which rock?
I like that one.
I did too. I was liking this one because it's got nice
Couldn't take
red
them both.
color, and I just wasn't sure. But this one, I've been looking for one like this that was naturally with the holes bored through it. And when I get back, I need to remember to put my rocks in bags because I have rocks from the first stop in my left pocket, and I have rocks from the second stop in my right pocket.
You're out
I
of
need to
pocket.
label them. Otherwise, I have to find new pockets. But I will forget where I got them. That would not be a good idea.
There we go. Down the steps.
Well, you gotta go ahead of me, because I gotta... Oh my goodness.
No, the person in front of you is.
He did say if you have to fall on your friend. Right, just fall in my pasture. You could fall in the other pasture, and that would be great.
You want to grab the rail?
Yeah.
Really pay attention, guys. Really pay attention.
Yeah, really, there are steep and holes.
Interesting, there's a whole room here that I'm sure it had a use. Very small though.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, that would have been a rough.
And that up there is the hole that we had in the ground above us.
That's where Mike would have fallen, right?
Yeah, right there. This is where an archer might have shot arrows out at those trying to climb up the hillside at them.
First of all, it's not chilly. I promise you that the next stop of your journey will be much chillier than here. This is warm now. So the Northern Watchtower, for my opinion, one of the two most interesting towers in the fortress. We'll see the other one in a minute. What's interesting to see here, first of all, one of the things that we can see on Muslim buildings throughout history is that they will try always not to build with corners at all. Everything needs to be as much as angle as we can and with a lot of arches. Does anyone know why do we see so many arches in Muslim way of building? By the way, we can also see arches in Crusaders buildings, and there's, from my opinion, and it's only my opinion, there isn't someone that can say for evidence that the Muslims invented the arch or that the Crusaders invented the arch. I think that none of them invented the arch. But what's very easy throughout history is that for someone that came and fight with someone that already lived here, there were two options after this battle. One is to ruin what the guy that was here before you built and build something from scratches. And what's more smart to do is to take what he did, change it a little bit that it will look more similar to what you're building, save a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort. In the end of the day, it's still very beautiful. In every place we can see Muslim building throughout history, there will be a lot of arches because the arch represents luck. In almost every entry to the house, there will be an arch, which means that if you enter the house, you will have luck. Next to the windows, there will always be arches also for luck. But here, this is not a house. Okay? As I said before, this is an army base, which means that here, the only thing they work is guards. Next to every place, there were sitting 3 guards. They were replacing between them throughout the day. And there were archers. They would sit with the board arch and aim to where they need to aim or watch to where they need to watch. If you look good, you can see that they have 3 arches above them. One big, one smaller, and one very, very small. And they made a lot of effort with creating a lot of arches. It wasn't just to have this fortress looks good or beautiful, because it wasn't the purpose. This is an army base in the end of the day. But the effect of the luck for them was very, very important. Now we're asking ourselves how they build it, because these rocks are huge, and they have a very, very, very simple system. When I'll finish telling you, think of where did you saw in the world the same way of building. So where they start building, the Sultan calls these builders and tell them, bring me rocks so we can build the whole tower, 3 rows of rocks. Look, the 3 rows of rocks is exactly the height of the shoulder, which means that they don't need to lift the rock too high. The rocks are very heavy. So they're building the whole tower, 3 rows of rocks. And then he calls them and tell them, go and bring me sand. They're not going to the ocean to bring sand, but the creek on the north of us, it's called Hazuri and Gofta. It's 2 creeks or rivers. We call everything a river in Israel because it makes us feel better. During the summer, it's dry, which means that on the bottom of the creek, there's a lot of gravel or sand or whatever you call it, and they're bringing it here, and they're filling up the whole room until they're creating a new floor. And then they're standing on the floor and building 3 rows of rocks. But before they put the sand inside, the Sultan steps inside, looks in his pocket, and finds a few gold coins and throw them on the floor. They cover the whole floor with sand, and they're building 3 rows of rocks. Once again, the Sultan steps inside, looks in his other pockets, finds a few gold coins, throw them once again on the floor. And then they're finishing the whole tower, so the whole tower is full of sand. And then the Sultan, which was very, very smart, and he understood that the significance of building this fortress fast was very important. And he sent his builder to build the other watchtower, because he needs to build a few here, 5. But along the way, he's sending a messenger to the village. In the village, underneath the fortress, sat all the families of the builders, of the soldiers, the elderly, the kids, anyone that wasn't fit enough to lift a rope, stay in the village. And the messenger will stand in the center of the village and shout, the Sultan, Al-Aziz Utman, the nephew of the great Salahuddin, invites whoever wants to come and look for gold coins in the room that's full of sand. The only thing you need to do is take the sand out, and you'll have a gold coin. A gold coin at the time was worth 3 weeks of food. It was worth a lot. Didn't take too long. The whole sand was outside. The idea behind building this system is, first of all, making sure that everyone will be in the effort of building the fortress. This story is not something that I invented, but the first people that discovered this fortress in 1900, the first thing they're finding is next to every watchtower outside, huge pile of sand, which is not a part of the original gravel of the fortress. And they understand that this is the way they build. They also finding a few gold coins inside, which probably in the gold rush were thrown outside. Gold coin at the time was something very, very small, equal almost to the shekel today, but half of the figure. I have one at home. I didn't say it now. Didn't worth that very much today.
In a safe.
Where in the world did they build in the same system? Do you have any idea? Pyramids in Egypt? Same system. King Herod had an amazing system of building things and lifting rocks to the high ground with ropes and everything. The Ayubans weren't there. The Ayubans were farmers in the end of the day. They were very simple people. They weren't that smart, but they knew how to think what they have around them and use it to the wrong good. So this is how they're building the whole tower. And this is how they're building the whole fortress. With sand, with rocks. Look around you and you'll see that there's no cement anywhere. There isn't any use of cement in the fortress, only in one place. In the center water hole, the center system, they used cement. Cement at the time was, first of all, very, very expensive. Second of all, very hard to find. And that's the only place they use it. So here the rocks are putting one on top of the other, slowly, slowly, but as you can see, still here for 800 years, so they probably did something right. Any questions?
Do we know how they would actually form the ark?
Excellent question.
I mean,
The idea behind the arch is that the center rock is what's holding the arch. Okay?
Keystone.
The keystone will be always the last rock that you will put inside, and you will create pressure, equal pressure, to both sides, and it's still standing. If you want, along your trip, at any time you want to, find yourself 7 rocks, and put 3 on every side, and then put, not big rocks, 5 rocks as big as your hand, and put the last rock, hold everyone together with the rocks, put the 7th one, the last one in the middle, and if you wait for a few seconds, you can see that if it will create pressure, it will stand. I'm building arches with my kids on a daily basis. It's working. You need to be a little bit patient. We don't have patience in the Mediterranean. It's mostly in Europe and the States and these kind of countries. But I brought some in a bag. But it's working. So the keystone holds the arch. And the same way on the idea of the keystone, on almost every room that we will enter, you will see that there is a different rock on the entrance to the room. And this rock will have a shape of, it's called a sleeve rock. It has sleeves on the sides. And the idea behind it is also, it's creating pressure that helps holding the entrance to the room for many years. But as you can see, I can talk as much as I want to, but in the end of the day, 800 years, still standing. So, yeah, pretty impressive. I think we'll keep on walking. Of course, if anyone has any questions, and look on something very interesting as we're walking. You won't find any quarters or beds or room or anything in the fortress. We're going to cross it now from north to south, and in the middle, there's nothing. This is an army base. If you're a soldier and you're serving here, and your job is to guard in the northern watchtower, when you finish your job, you lay down on the floor and go to sleep. You don't have a room to go to. And obviously your family is not here, it's in the village below. But this is an army base and it's built only as army base. Nothing here is comfortable. Everything is